Hello, this is Eric White. In this screencast, I'm going to introduce Ltxml.js, which is an implementation of sorts of LINQ for JavaScript. Beta 2 introduces a number of new features. First of all, it works with require.js, and second of all, it works with Node, and it works with various combinations of Node, JS, and jQuery. I'll run through all of those combinations here in a second. In order to try out the Node functionality, you're going to have to install Node on your computer, and you can get Node here at nodejs.org/download. First thing I'm going to do is install Node. Next thing to do is unzip the files in Beta 2. The first example that I'm going to show you is Ltxml.examples.html. I'll open it with Internet Explorer. I have to allow blocked content because I was running it right from my local hard drive. This is an example program with 20 examples that show a lot of the common idioms and common usages of Ltxml.js. It has, for instance, examples that show functional construction of XML that's in a namespace, creating an XML tree using a query, initializing an XML tree from an array. It shows querying using the elements access method and querying for elements that are in a namespace. This example, example 18, shows the use of the extension methods. There's a difference in using the extension methods in JavaScript. We can't actually dot into the extension methods as you can with the .NET implementation of LINQ. Well, for one thing, JavaScript doesn't even have extension methods. We could add those extension methods to the enumerable variable that is returned by LINQ.js, but there are problems with that, not least of which modifying another object from another library is not very polite, and there are actually cases, for instance, when using AMD in Node where it simply doesn't work. Instead, you need to code as seen here. You need to surround the call to the access method with a new xEnumerable constructor call. You can then dot into the various extension methods which are in the xEnumerable object. 19 and 20 show the equivalent idiom to casting elements and attributes in LINQ. If you're a student of LINQ, you know that you can retrieve values of elements and attributes by casting them to various scalar types. For instance, you can cast it to a string or you can cast it to an integer. There are advantages to using this approach over using the value property, specifically if you have a LINQ expression that might return null. Well, you can still cast that to a string and then test whether the string is null. It simplifies your code. That's a particular idiom. I'm not going to get into it right here. I've covered this elsewhere. So this is the Ltxml-examples.html program. There is also Ltxml-test.html, and I'll open this one with Google Chrome just for fun. What this example program does is it contains 190 different tests, and these tests cause code coverage over the entire Ltxml library. This is what I use to make sure that every single line of code in Ltxml has been exercised. You can see down here, it also includes timing for every one of the tests. I use this timing information, first of all, to make it perform well, and second of all, I continually watch it to make sure that the changes that I make to Ltxml.js don't regress with regards to performance. Now that we've looked at those two examples, there are 4 other examples that run in the browser that we want to take a look at. These examples show the smallest possible example to run a little bit of LINQ.xml code. One of them shows using neither require.js, in other words AMD, nor jQuery. It's this example ltxml-browser-amd-n-jQuery-n.html. This next example is the same example except that it uses jQuery. This third example uses require.js, in other words it uses AMD and it does not use jQuery. And this fourth example uses AMD and it uses jQuery. The various support files for using require.js and jQuery are here in this same folder, so you don't have to go looking for those files. You can just run these examples directly. So I can right click and open that with Internet Explorer, tell it I want to allow blocked content. All that this example does is tells us that in the particular code that it ran, the number of attributes of child elements was 2. Let's take a look at that code. All the code does is it declares a little string with a little bit of XML. It then uses the xelement.parse method to parse that XML and assign it to a variable y. And that makes sure that the xelement class is there and is operational. And next of all, it dots into the y.elements method and then passes that to the xEnumerable constructor and then calls .attributes on that. And this makes sure that the extension methods are operational, that it actually is using both the core ltxml.js and ltxml-extensions.js. If we look up here, the top line here is including LINQ.js, and this is the project that you can find at linkjs.codeplex.com. Then this next line brings in ltxml.js, and finally there is ltxml-extensions.js. And I had to split that out into a separate module because when using AMD, in other words, when using require.js, ltxml-extensions requires LINQ.js and it requires ltxml.js. It has a dependency on both of those, so it worked in the most clean fashion possible by putting it into its own module. Here's the same example using jQuery, and it tells us the number of attributes of child elements is 2. And if I look at that in Notepad, you can see it does the necessary jQuery stuff to wait for the document to be ready. It evaluates the same expression that it evaluated in the previous example that we looked at, and then it uses jQuery functionality to set this div element down here to the contents of the results of the query. And you could go and look at LTXML browser AMD yes, jQuery no, and LTXML-browser AMD yes, jQuery yes. They look exactly the same when you run them. They just show the mechanism by which you can use LTXML and require.js with or without jQuery. Now that we've installed Node, we have to get out and reopen our command prompt so that we can get access to Node. So I hold the Shift key down, I point at the folder that I'm interested in, and I tell it to open a command window here. We have Node running. This shows Node without using AMD, and it runs the exact same example. It tells us the number of attributes of child elements is 2. I can run the exact same example using Node and require.js. Sometimes people might ask, well, Node already has a module definition mechanism, and why do you use require.js with Node? And the answer is that in the project that I'm working on, I'm making some common code that uses require.js in the browser. In other words, it's run with the Dojo toolkit. And in addition, that same code is shared with a Node application, so it needs to use the exact same mechanism for asynchronous module definitions. And so it uses require.js under Node. So there you have it. This is the beta 2 of Ltxml.js, which is an implementation of LINQ for JavaScript. Feel free to come over to my blog at ericwhite.com and feel free to follow me on Twitter at ericwhitedev. Thanks for watching.